Well, zip ties aside, looks like that thing fits. That's gonna be okay. So how did I get that to fit beside this wonderful Australian motor? Tune in and find out. Take two. So basically, that's where it's going to sit. Looks like there's a lot more space. Moved it probably 1/4 of an inch more than I needed to. It's moved over exactly an inch from where the stock location is. Shout out to Zach Dameru, who did this first and gave me some of the idea that it would work. From here, I have some work to do on the pedal box because it was a V6 pedal box, and it turns out that the master cylinder pin on the brake pedal is about 3/4 to a full inch lower than the one on a GT with HydroBoost. So I'm going to modify that and get that put together, along with mounting the clutch master cylinder on the other side of that as well. There's fortunately space for that to fit inside there, and that's a whole nother series of videos. I have been kind of noodling around on that for the past 2 months. Anyways, we're making progress. How did I decide to move it an inch? And how did I do it? That's what this video is about. So let's go to the beginning where I'm trying to figure out how. Where we're at now, we've got our HydroBoost unit in, and of course, as we know, that collides with this part of the motor here. So at this point, the plan is, let's put the body down over the motor with that mounted there, and let's see how far off of our alignment these K-member bolts have to be for the engine to sit comfortably next to that. So my plan is to bring the body down with the motor like within 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch of that brake master cylinder there. See where we're at. If we're lucky and it goes as I think it will, we may have to just at the very most relocate that. It looks like we got about an inch between the firewall and that right now. We'll be able to do it without having to notch the shock tower. That's, you know, I don't want to. Okay, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. To really fully understand this, when I open the hood of my Coyote swap car, which has Maximum Motorsport camber caster plates, they are starting to, if I move that thing much, I'm going to start to interfere with the top of the reservoir and the camber caster plates. It's that close. And I just don't want to have that problem. But worst comes to worse, I can move the reservoir off the top of the brake master cylinder, you know, a set amount, and that would really suck. Okay, but it's kind of what you're up against, these really weird problems, and this is one of them. There's just a bunch of weird stuff here. Once I figure that out, okay, there's an order to this that goes like this. I get the brake master cylinder where it's comfortable in the engine bay alongside the engine in its natural location, and then basically I'm going to bolt the engine in temporarily and just go through the whole shenanigans of the hard parts to relocate to get this engine to a point where I can start it. Yeah, that's kind of like the order at this point. Once I've got the major components installed in this engine bay, and the engine bay roughly in the configuration that it will be for a running condition, when, you know, all the major hard to locate components are placed where they belong, then we can begin the process of an actual, you know, I'll start the engine, you know, figure out where the PCM and all the wiring, I'll start running the wiring for this thing, and we'll see how it goes from there. As you can probably tell, this is really the hardest part of the swap at this point here, is just trying to figure out all these components. Case in point, thanks to the way the mass airflow is mounted and the fact that I bought this was the first part I bought for my Coyote swap car. This was the first real part I bought for my yellow car back in probably 2001. I don't know how old that K&N is. It's really old. And it was a kit I bought from Summit, if I remember correctly. And my plan is to use a piece of 3-inch tubing and some silicone adapter pipe to have a true 3-inch inlet into the engine here, and use that. So that's an example of one of the next things I'm going to fit. As you can see, the engine bay is still kind of crusty. All the major structural stuff has been fixed. This may look like it's not done, but it is. This is the bolt-in radiator support. We'll actually bolt the radiator in for the first start. I'd like to have at least the radiator hoses for the front in place by the time I do the first start. So that's where we're at. About to do that fitting. Let's fit the engine in there and see how far off we are. The good news is that we're close here, but not, I mean, even if I had to bolt it in with the way it is right now, it probably would fit if I simply got rid of the bleeders on that brake master cylinder, which I'm not doing, of course. But we're at most maybe a 1/2 inch out of alignment here. Let's see if I can get a little more light. Not without major disruption. Yeah, do it with my phone. I'm going to measure it for sure, but you can kind of visually sight that 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and we got plenty of space to move that brake master cylinder that far to the right. So I'm going to go for the full Monty here, 3/4 of an inch to the right. We've got that space to move it over here. We've got that space inside. Let's take a look at the pedal box, what that looks like, to get an idea. All right, this is our pedal box. Never mind how scuzzy they look, they all look this way. Worse, even. For an Ohio pedal box, this thing's exemplary. So let's talk about this thing. All right, this is a V6 pedal box. I'm told there's a difference. I'm gonna check and see what that is. Tripping over exhaust parts. But can I relocate this 3/4 to the right easily? All right. And then my pedal, of course, will then be 3/4 of an inch to the right. However, I can simply, I can cut this pedal. It's a steel pedal, and I know steel. I can cut this pedal up high, right underneath where the pin mounts, and I can space it over 3/4 of an inch. So unless you're under the pedal box and looking up, you're not going to know that this pedal box was, not stock. It'll actually have the brake pedal in the right location for your foot. For heel and toe, I kind of like it a little bit closer to the clutch anyway. So I'll probably just space it over 1/2 inch and call it a day. But that's where we're at. This looks to me right. Like that's what the easiest thing to do here is. It's what Zach Dameru did, and he's got a functional car, although it's a race car. Mine's gonna be, you know, it's gonna look like a stock engine bay for the most part. If I space that thing right though, correctly, when I move it, there'll hardly be any anybody that knows the difference. I mean, you can already get some idea here that there's some difference when you see this has been turned. And of course the engine bay is going to be somewhat shaved. It'll be similar to my Coyote engine bay in that there'll be a lot of stuff running through here, but it won't look like a factory engine bay, in that the 2000 Mustangs appeared to have been like they just threw a big batch of wires, plumbing, and engine parts into an engine bay and just left it however it fell. There was no attempt to make beautiful engine bays except for the the Cobras. Had like it even went so cheaply far, I kid you not, as if you look closely at this paint, the paint on the engine bay for the cool cars like the non-Cobras and the Mach 1s, okay, is not clear coated. They didn't clear coat the engine bay. They just, so this paint here on the fenders and the engine bay paint is different. It's not clear coated. Which for my intents and purposes isn't going to make a huge difference, but it's kind of like, you know, pedestrian that they would actually make a distinction and, you know, cut corners to that depth. So I will clean this engine bay up whenever I go to do the final, you know, fitting, and, you know, before I start driving it, before the first drive. And I'll make as much of this plumbing like run nicely as possible, and just that difference alone, along with some TLC, like closing up holes that aren't used and hiding things that are nasty, okay? Along with that, this engine bay will come out looking a whole lot nicer than it looks right now, or that it ever did factory, for that matter. So, you know, back to this thing here, it will look somewhat like a stock engine bay, except nicer. Anyways, this is really coming along. I'm gonna do that slotting next, and then we'll move this thing over. And if that slotted spot where this thing's gonna sit does what I think it's gonna do in terms of fitment, the next step will be to bolt this engine in along with the transmission, and that's a major milestone for the next step, which is of course wiring and plumbing some of the engine enough for the first start. So we're on track to have our first start be right around the anniversary of 8 years from when I first started my Coyote, and that, man, that would be huge. I would love that, but it's a goal. It's not like a necessity. Anyways, found a rather interesting difference between a GT pedal box with the HydroBoost and a V6 pedal box, which would have come with vacuum boost. This pin, isn't that nice? That pin that you see there is 2.5 inches roughly from centerline to centerline of the pivot. And on a V6 car, it's like 3.5 or 3.75. I can't remember. There's a rather massive difference, and I didn't spot this, and I hadn't heard of it. I was on the forums on Facebook looking at some problem, or somebody had just converted a HydroBoost, and they're talking about this, and I'm like, what do you mean they're different? They are. Anyways, you know, I could go look for a GT pedal box. Part of the goal of the car is to reuse as much of the car as I can, and plus, you know, it didn't look all that complicated, and it's not. You grind the old weld off and drill a new hole and put the new weld, you know, put the new pin in place. And I'll do this. I'll weld it up. It's just funny to me. I never noticed this. So, slight delay. I'm going to make a pattern out of this mounting point and get the holes in the right spot. I'm still kind of wondering what the best approach to modifying these holes is going to be. I've cleaned up the area a little bit here, and there's some insulation back here already. I'm thinking if I put an aluminum plate here, I can carefully and slowly sew up these holes so that this is more structurally sound steel. Like a lot of things on a Fox chassis, you've got a lot of sandwiched steel to make a stronger unibody, and this is one of them. This is two like 16 gauge pieces of steel smashed together to make this mounting surface. And you can see there's a little bit of inaccuracy at the factory. They're like, well, you know, make this one a little bigger and that one's the tight one, you know, inside, etc. I'm going to have to come up with some strategy because I need these holes moved to the right about an inch. And I'm going to obviously need this hole probably moved with it, at least the opening. And right now it's you know, the last thing I want is an even bigger gaping hole here that doesn't support the braking mechanism, especially considering these holes kind of need to be drilled on something. So I might end up making a special sized thing here to accommodate the brake master cylinder, the HydroBoost one. Something to point out here is obviously if you've got a V6 with vacuum assist, and if you've got a pivot point that's lower on the brake arm, well, clearly you need to have a hole. That's why that's oval shaped. The HydroBoost hole is here, and the vacuum assist hole is larger in here. So while I move this, I'll probably shrink it. And again, I'll probably put an aluminum plate back there while I weld so that I don't heat too much in one specific spot, and so I don't set the car on fire. This is the kind of stuff I don't like to do alone, so might have a spotter, my grandson, somebody else assist, watch inside the car. But yeah, you've got all these things that you've got to do. If you're going to play in this particular arena, it's just not something I'm comfortable doing, but I say that a lot with this build. There's just so much. Anyways. All right, managed to fit it in. Probably going to be making, there's going to be some more welding going on here, but for engine fitment purposes, this fits exactly where I wanted it to be. If you could see, it's darn close to the shock tower mount, and I have Maximum Motorsport camber caster plates, which you'd think wouldn't matter, but it could mean me having to make a little bit of adjustment to this reservoir. The reservoir is, you know, it's made to hold fluid, and worst comes to worst, I will carve the top half of it off here, seriously, and just make a dent in it for where the Maximum Motorsport thing comes through. And use epoxy and some of my other skills to sew it back up. It's either that or get different camber caster plates, and I'm not doing that either. I like the Maximum Motorsport ones. So it's just an intrusion of about maybe a half of an inch to an inch into the top of this, if it comes down to that. But the good news is, on my first try, by making a really crappy looking template here, but it worked. I got all the holes drilled exactly where they need to be, and I carved out the firewall for where the rubber boot goes through for this HydroBoost unit, and HydroBoost fits That means next step is to bolt the back bolts in here, just maybe 2 nuts to hold this in place where it needs to go, and fit the engine in. And if the engine fits, likely it will, because I've done a test fitting to check for this exact issue. At that point, I will bolt the engine and transmission into place so that I can continue on trying to figure out all this stuff. Now, I've got a lot of welding to do left. Not a lot, but a huge amount of cleanup here. You can see I've been sort of marking things, and you know, it's daunting at times, but you don't think about all the work while you're doing it. You just soldier on. Point though is at this point that my HydroBoost mounting is complete, or rather the holes are, and I can move onward. And so there we go. Take 2. So there it is. The engine is spaced down about 1 inch from the K-member. Not exactly 1 inch. On this side it's a little more than 1 inch, and on this side it's probably 1.25 inches. But even taking that into account, we've got plenty of space. So very close now at this point to wiring up the engine and giving it a first start. I know it doesn't look that way. The brake master cylinder is held in by 1 nut, and the transmission is missing a flywheel clutch and slave master cylinder, and I haven't finished the pedal box, and I could go down the list of things. However, to start the engine, I really need oil in it, a PCM hooked up, which I have in a box, and some wiring. That's it. I mean, I need a flywheel. I have a flywheel. I have an automatic flywheel, but I'll bolt that on. What the heck? So I want the engine bolted in the car for the first start, obviously. So I have the K-member spacers. I have everything I need to do that. It's just a matter of getting to that point. Once the first start happens, all bets are off as to when I get to drive it. But that's, I think, one of the things everybody's waiting for. So thanks for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe. Check the bell icon if you want to know when these videos are coming out. And just a couple other shout outs. Zach Damru, appreciate all your motivation and help on all this. It's been a terrific resource. Chris Nieves, don't forget, Chris has got a slug of these motors. He's got inventory, and these are terrific motors. And Tilton Engineering for coming to my rescue for my clutch. And for that, I'm going to tune out. Please don't forget to subscribe, check the bell icon,